Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Brewery Underground Podcast. I'm Steve Sullivan, joined as always by the Chancellor of Craft Beer, Scott Touron. And this is our part 2 episode with the dynamic and fantastic Scott Mertie of Nashville Brewing. Sit back and enjoy.
You collect, we've talked about beer cans. You've got over 3,000 beer cans.
Got about almost 10,000.
Was it 10,000?
Yeah.
10,000 beer cans.
I had about 3,000 by the time I was in high school.
Okay, that's.
It's funny, real quick, when we started figuring out what we were going to focus on here, and there's so many different things, and I had that at the top of my list, but I thought, you know what, we gotta focus on like the history first. But then I'm going, and then this guy has all these beer cans. So, yeah.
Yes.
Funny thing, you sent earlier today, you sent us a video through Instagram, and it was from a 50 or 60-year-old?
60-plus-year-old can. So, beer can history, the can was first released in 1935. And so we didn't have beer in cans prior to that, but it was released in the test market in 35, and then by 1940, started to become more popular. And into the 50s, then we started seeing beer in cans and bottles about 50-50 at that point. But the pull tab was not invented until the late 60s. So prior to that, you had to use the slang word with the church key, but it's a can opener.
Uh-huh.
The can was flat, so you think like opening a can of high C punch or something. You had to use that can opener to open it, or we had a cone top can, which looked like an old oil can that had a bottle cap on it. And so different breweries either use a flat top or a cone top. Just depending on the cone tops would fit through an existing bottling line, so they didn't have to invest in more capital equipment to have a canning line. But that Guinness can, so that's a can from late 50s, maybe early 60s, and I had it full and thought, wonder what this really tastes like. So popped that open, amazingly had a head still. I poured it through a coffee filter just to make sure it did not taste great, which I would not expect it to taste great. Oxygen is an enemy to beer, and unfortunately in canning you can't control the oxygen nearly as much as you can in bottling or kegging, just because you could fill with CO2 and they can handle the pressure, whereas the can, you can't do that as easily, and you got a bigger circumference area to seal, and it takes a little longer. So cans just have a shorter shelf life. So 60-year shelf life. The beer was not good, but it's kind of cool just to try it.
Absolutely.
I do that every once in a while. I've got a couple full Gerst bottles that one of these days I'll probably pop open.
How do you come across something like that? Obviously, just in your archive.
Yeah, just in a lot of research, and old people, they'll turn up in old barns, and people know I collect, so people find that kind of stuff. They reach out.
You're probably a go-to, hey, look what I came across.
Exactly.
So I was going to ask you, some of your other memorabilia that you get, the cans. Obviously, I think in your book I saw you had a bunch of different, like can openers and things.
Various can openers.
Yeah. So what are some of your sources that you get? Or is it people just kind of coming to you, like you said?
Yeah, people will come to me locally. I think if you just start Googling, the Nashville Gerst bottle or can opener or something, my name will pop up as a collector. So, but there's several national organizations too. One's the Brewery Collectibles Club of America, the BCCA, and then there's the National Association of Breweriana Advertising. Breweriana is kind of the catch-all term for collecting beer advertising, Breweriana. But the Brewery Collectibles Club of America, they have a national conference every year, and it's called a Canvention. So it's mostly beer can collectors, but collecting everything. So that Canvention is in a different city every year. The city is going to be in Little Rock, and I'm actually there having me speak there at one of the seminars talking about beer history, just like we are today.
And then people would bring stuff.
Oh, it's a big buy-sell trade. So it's in a big convention center.
Okay,
so
that's awesome.
Generally, you got about 1,000 people attending, having trade tables. And
you come across stuff that you've never seen before, I guess.
Always. When you think you've seen everything from a particular brewery, something will surprise you.
Is there is there like a unicorn out there that you're kind of looking for? Is there anything?
Yeah, that I'm just always looking for something different that's Nashville. And so a lot of times I just don't know something like that exists until it pops up. Yeah. In the beer can world, there's a can, ironically from Cincinnati again, but it's I think it's a Hutable can. It's a gallon-sized can, bigger can. It's got a camel on it, and there's only like 4 of those known to exist. They go for about $10,000.
Oh wow!
A piece. Although recently a can just sold in an auction for $60,000. I forget offhand what brand that was, but $60,000 for one empty beer can.
It's amazing.
Well, you were very young when you started collecting.
I was about 7 years old. And that just started, my mom was a Girl Scout leader for my older sister, and I got dragged on a Girl Scout hike because I did not want to go, but my mom didn't want to pay for a babysitter, so I had to go, and I just saw some shiny beer cans on the side of the road or the paths and picked them up, and I got home and I had 15, 20 beer cans. I still remember I had a Schlitz Tall Boy, was one of those cans.
Wow. Yeah.
And
was it in good shape when you found it?
it was decent shape,
Okay.
yeah. Maybe a Pabst Blue Ribbon, I'm sure Budweiser.
Or PBR,
some of those cans, yeah. And so then, my parents had a couple beers in the fridge. I said, hey, I want that can when you finish it. So then I had 25 cans, and like I said, my dad was traveling a lot, so he started bringing back cans, and then the people he was working with in the different countries he was going to would mail me cans. So it was like Christmas. I get all the time I get a big box, and there'd be 20 or 30 cans from Kenya.
Okay, I have to stop right there
amazing.
real quick because that was actually one of my questions. And before we go off, because I was like, I don't want to minimize that one. It was one of my questions of like, how many beer cans do you have from other countries? And so your dad traveled to other countries?
Yeah, and I still to this day, I like to, it used to be I would just collect any can I could find.
Yeah.
And you get to a point where, and this is how most collectors are, your collection gets so big that you got to start specializing.
Yeah.
And so obviously I started collecting in Nashville, Brewery Underground. There's only 2 beer cans that were ever made in Nashville. There are 2 Gers, a Gers 57 and a Gers 77. Those 2 brands. So those are the only 2 beer cans that exist. Have quite a few of those, great condition, and collecting world conditions, everything. But you start specializing, and because I had so many of the foreign cans just growing up, I really got into collecting these foreign cone tops and flat tops, which would be the cans from the 30s through the 60s, so the older ones. So some of them show up on eBay or trade shows, so that's what I'm looking for. And then being from Ohio, I do the same thing from Ohio. So I'm looking for older Ohio and foreign cans, and that's really what my focus is. I don't focus on modern cans now, and I'm so glad that craft breweries are canning now. I'm hoping a new generation will start getting into collecting. Unfortunately, millennials, they don't like to hang on to stuff.
Right.
But there's hope. There's some of them that are.
If there were just a few that would do it, right?
Exactly. Keep that hobby alive. And at some point, they're going to realize, hey, these are collectible. They're worth some money too.
Yeah.
Do you have beer cans from every state?
I probably do from every state. I'm pretty sure I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you how many countries, but probably at least 70 or 80 countries.
Wow. And are you're still collecting?
I still collect. Like I said, I do specialize, so I'm not into the volume anymore. It's more as just a quality versus quantity.
Have you met other people like you that collect this many beer cans? Anybody that has surpassed you in the number of beer cans that they have that you know?
Surprisingly, to the serious collectors, my collection would be considered fairly small or average. We'll say average. There's people that have a lot more. But like I said, a lot of those people start specializing, and so they're looking at very specific older cans in excellent condition that be very valuable. So
almost like baseball cards or something.
Exactly.
Right?
Spending $500 on one can versus $500 for 500 cans.
Right. And are they graded too, almost like a baseball card?
They are.
Okay.
They're graded, and there's all kinds of books out there with the gradings and values and all that stuff. Yeah. Yep.
It's a whole other world. We've talked to several brewers in town, and something I always like to ask is the sense of community within the beer industry. And we can talk about Nashville because it's where we are, and we've heard really good stories about their breweries helping breweries.
I heard your podcast with Carl, and we certainly work back and forth with Black Abbey.
Yep.
Well, and you probably heard too me talking about it because again I would go back to I had mentioned Bosco's because that was one of the few, and he's like, oh yeah, Bosco's. That's how we kind of got our idea started. I'm like, that is really cool because I remember Blackstone and Bosco's were the different places in Nashville where you could get craft beer at that time.
Yeah, and so I know Carl had mentioned, the homebrew club would meet at Bosco's a lot, and I would do that.
Yeah.
I had developed that relationship with the owners of Blackstone at the time, Kent and Stephanie, and their brewmaster, Dave Miller, who had written a lot of home brewing books. Ironically, when I lived in Ohio in college is when I got into home brewing, and I had a book written by Dave Miller, a home brew book he was from St. Louis, and very early on in writing about home brewing and all that stuff. And I'd moved to Nashville after graduating, and a few years later, Blackstone opened up, and I noticed that the brewer that they had hired was this guy, Dave Miller. And I thought, surely that's not the same guy that wrote this book. I mean, Dave Miller's a pretty common name, two of the most common first and last names out there. I find out he was from St. Louis, and sure enough, he was the guy that wrote that book. So it's just very ironic. I had this book from 5 years earlier, and he was the author of that. Got to know him, became very good friends. He retired from the brewery maybe 8 years or so ago, but he's still a consultant. He's here in Nashville. He always gets the first keg of when we do the Oktoberfest. He's always gets a keg of that to take home, and he still does our toast. We have an Oktoberfest here at the brewery every year, and he does that opening toast. We call him the beer mayor. German would be the Burgermeister, but the mayor typically taps that keg and gives that initial toast. So Dave still comes and does that. Phenomenal knowledge. So I learned a lot just from home brewing from Dave, and then Fred Scheer, who is a German brewer, a classically trained German brewer that came to America, and he became a brewer at Bosco's, and so became friends with him too. So I had two great mentors to learn in brewing. Even though I don't brew daily here, we got a team of brewmasters. Yeah. Just having that knowledge was great. And then Kent Taylor, I think anyone you have talked to so far, Kent Taylor, the co-founder of Blackstone, even though he's not here brewing day to day, he's just a phenomenal wealth of knowledge. And so when him and I, we're both accountants, that's our day jobs, and so we kind of hit it off for the love of beer and numbers, I guess, if you will. So we've been friends for a long time. That's ultimately what developed in this partnership. And but I mean, he just knows so much. He's kind of nicknamed the Godfather of brewing in Nashville, just because Blackstone was the first brew pub in Nashville. At the time, Bohannon was just a production brewery. They didn't open a brew pub till later. Okay. But just a wealth of knowledge, and from a technical aspect, much more than I can even attempt to get into from the scientific side. Quality control, the lab that we have here, he just knows everything about all that stuff. He's phenomenal.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think he had said, or Carl had said that he had sent his guy, when they were building out their brewery or something, he had sent a guy over there, I think like every day, just to kind of check on him.
Our guy Coop really keeps this place running, particularly on the production side, so our bottling line stuff. Coop's our maintenance engineer, and so he helped them out. He's helped a lot of other breweries out in town, just from because you got to have a machinist at some point or access to one. And, one of these things breaks down, and you got a batch of beer that you're trying to package, and you can't do something with it. You're going to have to dump it. So.
Yeah, we just talked to Chris Shields from Rheingeist this past week, and he was, and I forgive me for not knowing the other brewery, but maybe it was Taft's.
Yep, Taft. Right.
There was a piece that had gone down, and they didn't have a backup for the keg, cleaning the kegs and whatnot. So Taft's would let them borrow theirs at night while they were doing theirs in the day. Otherwise, they couldn't have done anything for like a week and a half. They had to do that. So that kind of sense. I always like hearing those kind of stories.
Sure, and not just that. Sometimes there's ingredients. You got lined up to do a certain batch of beer, and you're short on certain types of hops. And so, I mean, all the breweries in town are great. And you call up and say, "Hey, do you happen to have such and such hops? We're shy, a pound." And someone will run it over and like, "Sure, come on, pick it up." Yeah, it's great.
There's definitely, and I know in this town, there's definitely enough room for everyone, and probably room for more. Like, I don't know. When we go to breweries, we like going to multiple kind of in an area because kind of the more there is, the more we will hit.
Sure.
So it's, if you have several in an area, 3, 4, 5, let's go hit them all.
Exactly.
It's kind of hence me breaking down. I was telling you earlier, like the West Nashville breweries and East Nashville breweries I'm writing about. Say, hey, these they're not necessarily walkable, but they're close proximity.
Exactly.
That's what's over
here.
here.
And we have a lot of people come in here, whether they're tourists coming from out of town, and they've researched us because they know from a quality standpoint. We've won a lot of awards, both under Blackstone and Nashville Brewing Company. So we do get research that way. So people come to Nashville, they do want to seek us out, even though we're not downtown on the tourist trail. They'll come here, as well as just locals that come here. But the one thing I always ask, what other breweries to check out? And so, we're always happy to offer those recommendations. Again, we're friends with most of the other breweries in town. So
yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, like of the tours you do and the people that are coming in. CMA Music Festival, obviously a big deal. People come in for the Grand Ole Opry, whatever they're coming in for Nashville for, right? What percentage? I mean, do you get a lot of people from out of town that are?
We do. It's hard to say a percentage, but anytime I am here, just hanging out, having a beer, there's going to be someone at the bar that's visiting from somewhere, and I always ask, how did you find out about us? And they say, well, I was researching on the internet and saw like the porter. So the Blackstone St. Charles Porter is the most awarded porter in the country, and one of the most awarded beers in the country through the Brewers Association sanctioned events. And so people want to try that beer. They see, wow, this has won so many awards. They want to come try that. And now our Nashville Lager has won a number of awards. So people want to seek that out.
But for something like the CMA Music Festival, you guys packed here,
I will say, I wouldn't say we're packed because of the festival.
Yeah.
Those people like the honky tonks downtown.
But a lot of people that are coming, but still
the
coming in.
ones that are seeking out craft beer and not necessarily, Bud Miller Coors and Long Necks and country music, they will come here.
Yeah. I'm curious what your assessment really is. We've talked so much about the history. Let's talk about current day a little bit. What really is your assessment of the beer scene currently in Nashville? What do you make of it?
So, I mean, it's great. We've seen tremendous growth, particularly in the past 10 years. When we had, when Blackstone and the others first opened up in the 90s, then we had Yazoo in the 2000s. We really didn't have anything else again until 2010, and then we saw the Jackalopes, the Black Abbeys, and those start opening, and then the next decade, these past 10 years, we've just had an influx of breweries opening. And that's great. It's great because everyone has their own little unique style. We all are going to brew certain beers that, that other brewers are going to do. They're all going to taste a little bit different. We all got different stories behind each beer. And we've got a number of breweries, not just in Nashville, but Middle Tennessee. And it's great to see that growing because, in the 90s, we had maybe like 8 breweries in the state.
Yeah.
So it's great.
Are there trips that you want to go on that you've not been to, say, other cities or countries that you're going, I've got to get here?
So I am always looking. So I love to travel for fun, and then for my day job, I travel a lot for work. By the mid-2000s, I had logged probably about 400 breweries in the United States. And this is before we had the big boom of breweries too. But everywhere I would travel for work, I would seek out the different craft breweries and go to. I'd drive 2 hours out of the way sometimes to hit a specific brewery. Now we have a lot more to choose from. I stopped keeping track. It got too crazy. I kept an Excel spreadsheet. That's the nerdy accountant in me of the different breweries I would travel, and then I stopped with that.
It gets to be too much, right?
But as far as beer history travel too, I love going to Europe, going to other countries. I was in Japan this summer, just seeking out sake, which sake technically is a beer. A lot of times people call it a rice wine, but it's made from a grain. It's a beer. But really in Europe, whether it be Ireland or particularly in Germany, Czech Republic, either further down the Danube in Eastern Europe and Belgium, of course. I mean, there's just so much beer history, and I love going to the older breweries and really digging in and trying these older
styles. I was going to say, going to some of those older countries as a beer historian, what have you found there that you're going, oh my gosh, I had no idea. What's blown your way?
Yeah, a lot of times over there, people don't like I'm amazed. Like, okay, you guys have been doing this beer for 200 years. It's phenomenal. And a lot of times they're like, well, we're just making beer. They don't think about it.
Yeah.
And they're doing it the same way for 200 years too, a lot of times.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, well, it's just what we've always done, and we're making a living. And they don't see it in the same way that sometimes I see it.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially when you can't get something that's so good. From that over here, that's over. Then you go over there and you get it. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is the greatest. And it's just beer. We drink it here all the time. I think.
Like offline, before we got started, we were talking about Prague, and I've driven all through the Czech Republic and gone to a number of breweries there, and there'll be I've got a Pilsner Urquell, of course, which is somewhat touristy now. I shouldn't say touristy; it's just a great destination spot for anyone who loves beer, because that's where Pilsner style beer that was birthed. But then you got a lot of other smaller breweries around the modern day Czech Republic that have been around for they've been around a lot longer than 200 years, but doing Pilsners for 150 years now. And they just don't think anything about it. So, well, this is what we do, and sometimes the equipment. I mean, everyone's doing upgrades to their equipment, but where they're doing it, they're tucked in, carved in the side of a mountain where their lagering tanks are. And I'm like, to me, that's just phenomenal, because we got these, modern day refrigerated, beer cellar that's not in a cellar, because technology takes care of that for us, but they're still doing it back in cellars, and they don't think anything about it.
It's worked for them for hundreds of years.
Exactly.
That's why change it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the Untapped app? And I ask because on your side of the table, us as consumers, we use it, we log it in, but we've heard multiple stories. I've never thought about it until somebody actually brought it up. As an owner.
So, I use it sometimes. I mentioned I used to keep a spreadsheet of the breweries I would go to. It's a great tool to track what beers you have tried and what breweries you've been to and stuff. As a brewery owner, I hate it.
Yep.
It's one of the biggest pet peeve of mine in the world is, we've got this award-winning lager, Bavarian Helles, and someone gives it a half star with a comment, "I hate lagers." It's like, well, why the fuck are you drinking? You hate lagers.
Thank you. I agree with that.
And I wish there was a way that people could rate the beer for the style, what it's intended to be. And, and if you don't like that particular beer, how we made it to that style, then say so. That's great. But just saying you don't like that style and you're giving it 1 star or less just because you don't like the style, that does not help everyone at all, because people look at other comments and average ratings and stuff, and that just doesn't add up at all.
Right. I was literally at Deep South Growlers the other day, and somebody showed me they had their Untapped, and I said, "Look at this." And some idiot, I don't know who it was, had posted something, and it was 4,000 ratings, and the overall rating on it was like a 3.9.
Yeah.
And this idiot had posted a half a star. And said the exact same thing. "I don't like this style." I was like, man, just don't even rate it then. You can check it in, just don't rate it.
Or someone, I've had this happen numerous times too with our Nashville lager. It's brewed according to the Reinheitsgebot, the German purity law of the year 1516, which means it's just barley malt, hops, and water. The law got changed later when they figured out what yeast was. No one knew what yeast was prior to the microscope, but they knew something was happening, but it was the gods doing it. So we brew in those very traditional methods, and like someone will make a comment saying, there's too much corn in this beer. It's like, well, there's no corn in this beer. There's never been corn in this beer.
Oh my gosh.
And so I try to do a comment to educate people. And of course, you do it in a polite manner, saying, this is made with 100% barley malt.
Yeah.
There's no corn in here. You're not tasting corn. But just because they think of a light lager, I'm talking light in color, not a light in calorie, but just a light-colored lager beer as a Miller or Coors that have corn, or a Budweiser has rice, as a supplemental grain to get cheap alcohol, cheap way to make alcohol. And so people think that's in their head. Well, it's got to have corn in it because it's that color, because it's a corn colored, So it's try to educate in my responses. I've somewhat given up on that now to a certain degree. But
well, and I also think, not to go off on my own tangent, but I also think everything is subjective. When we started this podcast and we started talking about what do we want our focus to be, let's focus on the beer, the breweries, you guys. And if we're talking about rating beers that we've had, I'm not going to trash something.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain beers that I have not liked that maybe I've rated, or certain breweries I've gone to that I go, okay, that's not exactly my thing. It doesn't mean that brewery stinks. It may mean that brewery is not my cup of tea.
Exactly.
I mean, I've been in different breweries where they've won awards and I've gotten the beer and I'm like, I don't know what the big deal is.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean it's a bad beer.
Exactly.
It's like anywhere else. You can go, If you go to a movie theater and you have 100 people in there watching a movie, 50 of them may come out hating the movie, 50 of them might like the movie.
Exactly.
Yeah, at least give it a fair rating. And there's necessarily no criteria. Like in my mind, like a 3 and above. Like I'll have anything 3 and above. I'll have again. 3.5 higher, kind of really good, and then kind of upward from there. So somebody's got their own kind of criteria, but give something a half a star.
And when I rate stuff, I'm one of those that if I can't say something good, I'm not going to say anything at all. So I'm like, I've had places where the beer is just horrible, and I know it's skunked. Something's gone wrong. Yeah. I'm just not going to rate it. I'm just not going to.
Yeah,
I'm not going to do that.
Right.
There's no reason to do that. But in talking about ratings, so that I mentioned that the awards we won through Brewers Association sanctioned events. I feel like that's important just to make a note on, because there's a lot of competitions out there, and they're not all judged fairly because it is subjective. So people have different ideas of what a particular style of beer should taste like. But the Brewers Association, those competitions, those judges, they're all certified judges, and they go by what's called the BJCP, or the Beer Judge Certification Program, through the certification, and there's certain guidelines that the particular style for that category, that you basically are checking off boxes. Does it meet this from a color, aroma, flavoring, head, etc. And one style of beer is going to have different matrix than another, and that's how that judging takes place. But there's other competitions that it may not be that way, or you might not have certified judges, or they may not be following those exact same criteria. Right. So we don't fool with those competitions.
I've seen the, what do you call it, the
BJCP.
CP. Yeah. Doing a definitions page on our website, just kind of say, and that's where I put a lot of that information from. Was from
they've got a great little grid of all the different styles. So you got the 2 parent styles, ales and lagers, and then all the various subcategories that fall under that.
When I first looked at that, I guess I should have known this, but literally only 2 styles of beers.
Yeah.
Lagers and ales, and everything falls underneath that. I did not know that until.
And the difference is the yeast. It's the 2 styles of fermentation. Like I mentioned, ales are the old style of beer. Lagers are relatively new, 500 years or so. Yeah. But beer goes back about 13,000 years. It's the oldest, or I shouldn't say the oldest, the second oldest man-made beverage made for production. Tea would be the first, but it predates wine. I'm sure wine existed, fermented grapes and stuff, but people weren't making it on purpose for consumption like they were for beer. Dating back 13,000 years in what's now modern-day Israel. They got evidence of basically production breweries making stuff in clay pots back then, and then all through Mesopotamia and Egypt, hieroglyphics showing all kinds of stuff in the brewing process. Have you heard of the hymn to Ninkasi?
No.
So Ninkasi was a goddess, and I think this was in Mesopotamia, so modern day, is that Iraq, where they found a tablet, and it's basically, they translated it, and it was a poem to Ninkasi, who was the goddess of fermentation for that particular culture. And so we know now that, to have fermentation, you got to have right conditions. Just like for growing crops, you got to have the right amount of rain and temperatures and stuff. For beer, it's the temperatures, and everything was natural airborne yeast. Again, we weren't pitching yeast back then; no one knew what it was. So it was just natural airborne yeast. We'd make this grist or a mash of liquid and grain, and then hoping something would happen. And if the conditions were right, fermentation would happen. So they would pray to the goddess Ninkasi for fermentation, just like pray to the rain gods for rain for the crops. So it's the same thing. And it wasn't until the Middle Ages that really beer started coming down as a science more in Europe, and that was the church. It was the monasteries. They were, for the most part, the only educated people in the Middle Ages, and so the church really kind of controlled brewing from 500 AD to 1500 AD. So for about 1,000 years, the church controlled that process. Then as the Romans that brought beer from the Middle East into Europe, as they were building their roads throughout Europe, they brought beer, and eventually they figured out that, hey, beer was better, it lasts longer, and tastes better in these colder climates. So the further north you got, the better the beer was, and you had all these different brewing regions, like we were talking about, Belgium, England, Ireland, and Germany. But in Bavaria, and everything was so isolated then, because you didn't have the transportation we do now. Bavaria was doing their own thing. And one thing from a quality control standpoint, Bavaria for 1,000 years, has had, and they still have, a royal family. They just don't control anything now, but the royal family, for hundreds of years, controlled everything, and they also controlled the brewing process and worked with the monks. They used to be they would buy the beer. The royal family in Munich would get the beer from the Augustiner monks at the Augustiner Brewery. Finally, they decided, hey, rather than paying the church, let's start making our own beer, and that's where the Hofbrau brand came from. That's the Royal Port Brewery. So they started making it themselves. But quality was very important, just like we think of Germans today, very into quality with our Mercedes or whatever.
Yep.
Beer was a quality thing, and they knew in summer, and this is back still monasteries brewing, but in the warmer months, the beer would spoil faster. And they said, we're not going to allow you guys to make shitty beer, so let's not brew in the summer. Let's just brew in the cooler months, and then we'll store the beer or lager the beer in caves. We'll ice down these caves, and let the beer store, and we'll drink on through the year. And then in the fall, we'll start brewing again, and we'll make room. We'll drink up all that old beer. Those were the early harvest festivals. We got new grain, new brewing season, so we'd empty the cellars for the new beer. And this was all, originally just ales. And that's where that Marzen name came from. Marzen's German for March. So it would be the beer brewed in March. That was the end of the brewing season. They would lager it. And then the fall, drink out whatever was left over to make room for the new beer. So those were the pre-Oktoberfest, those fall harvest festivals.
Awesome.
But the lagers was a happy accident because ultimately over time the ale yeast was not surviving the cooler temperatures in these caves. But there was another type of yeast surviving. There's Latin terms for the yeast I'm not going to pronounce, but what's called lager and ale yeast. But the lager yeast was surviving. And through survival of the fittest over decades and a couple centuries, the ale yeast just fully died off. And these breweries just had this lager yeast, and it became its own style of beer.
Did the color kind of come from that too?
It did. So the coloring, the coloring came from the roasting the malt that I mentioned. So the kilning in the mid 1800s really is where the color came from, but the clarity is what happened. Yep. So in the lager tanks, these barrels the yeast would settle, those yeast cells would settle, and it would become a much clearer beer. And that became just a huge thing, because another thing that was happening was glass. So glass, the church used it for stained glass and everything, but only the wealthy drank out of glasses. So we had steins, the stone steins, or even wood vessels to drink out of. But we started having clear beer and then lighter beer. So we had this light, clear beer by the mid 1800s. And then we had glass, so people could afford glass, because there used to be the big tax all throughout Europe, this big glass tax. So that went away. And then the other key thing, not to really nerd out on you guys,
go ahead,
but you're fine.
We all now, how the royal families now, like Princess Diana and Princess Kate, they set trends. And back then, Queen Victoria, she was German, even though she was the Queen of England. She had a German family, and her husband was German. Cousin of hers that she married, but they were German. So even though you got the Queen of England, she was German. She liked drinking German beer, and she would get lager imported because that's what she liked. And you didn't import that stuff then, but when you're the Queen of England, you can pay for that. Yeah. And she was drinking out of a glass, and word spread she's drinking this light, clear beer out of a glass, and now all of a sudden anyone could afford to drink out of a glass. And so they wanted those German beers. At the same time, we started having this mass German immigration at that time in the mid to late 1800s, and that's how lagers just really took off then and became so popular. But a couple of different things going on, but one of them was Queen Victoria, just because that's what she drank, and people were like, that's got to be cool.
Trendsetter.
Cool. Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. Hey, before we wrap things up, which we hate to even wrap things up because we could be here all day. Let's talk about the future for you and what the future holds here.
Yeah, so hopefully keep brewing beer. That's kind of the main goal. We always like to put out some new releases.
You got anything like that coming? Do you know, or that you can tell us?
Nothing specific offhand that I can think of. The Rosh beer, like I said, we'll be doing another Rosh beer. But really just keeping up with what we're doing. We just really like to keep making good beer. But we are seeing that the craft brewing industry in general is hurting a little bit. We've had a couple closures, even here in Nashville.
Yeah,
one not too far from here.
Exactly,
Recently. It was
exactly.
a shame.
And so we do have longevity on our side. We've been around here a long time, and so we hope to keep that going. But there's an old saying in the brewing business: if you want to make a small fortune in the brewing business, you start with a large fortune. So there's not a whole lot of people getting rich at making beer. Even though we're one of the bigger production breweries in town, you really got to get mass volume to making a profit. It's a capital intensive business.
Something I'm curious about. You guys do a really good job, I think, of bringing out seasonal beers at the right time when it's kind of that season or just before. A lot of breweries don't. And I'm not even just talking about here, the big national brands. Yeah, rhymes with Ram Madams. But which I like, and I like their stuff. But Summer Ale will be out this month. Yeah, and they could what's your? I hate it.
So it's all about money. It's about sales and
commercializing.
Exactly, and to be the first ones on those shelves, and with that particular brewery you mentioned, they're notorious for that. Yeah. So we're starting to see Oktoberfest beer in August.
Yes. Yep.
Is we're seeing it, and so then that kind of dictates things, though. So like the Kroger, the Walmart, the Publix, those kind of big stores that buy a lot of beer. If it gets in there first, then they're saying, well, we got one particular brand. We want all of our Oktoberfest at the same point. So then they start pushing the distributors, and the distributors start pushing us as the brewers, saying, hey, we need your Oktoberfest by X date. Traditionally we like to release it September 1st, but honestly, I mean, it's before you see it out in the market, it's out and being packaged earlier to get out.
Yes.
But September 1st is our true release date for Oktoberfest.
And even though I will admit I love Oktoberfest and I could drink it all year, I understand the premise of Oktoberfest and why is it coming out in June?
Sure, yeah. It's not particularly the style of beer you want to drink when it's 95 degrees out.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other end of that is so when their Oktoberfest comes out, it does away with Summer Ale, which and I like that one. So if you just when the Oktoberfest goes away with theirs, the winter stuff comes out, which I'm not the biggest fan of. But what if you just kept that fest beer out longer? Even if we started early, just leave it out kind of during the season. As a consumer, it's just a pet peeve.
I agree as a consumer, but it's dealing with the retailers. Yeah. And again, it's always new marketing. What's the?
Yeah, you just got to keep up with the Joneses kind of thing. But my gauge always used to be when Pumpkin Ale would hit the stores. It was always in September. Okay, you guys are doing it right. It's a little further in the season. It's not August anymore, and that's when I would be like, okay, all right. Now we're kind of getting into the fall beers.
Yeah. So here at our brewery, our Pumpkin Ale is very popular, which that won gold as well this past year at the Great American Beer Festival. So the Pumpkin and the Nashville Light both won gold, which we're just ecstatic about. But the Pumpkin and the Oktoberfest, those two beers. The demand is to try and get out. Again, it's not the consumer's demand, but it's the distributor retailer's demand to us to have those out early. So, of course, the lager is taking a lot longer. So we're starting that lager, in the spring, and to have ready by then. But that and the Pumpkin Ale, which Pumpkin Ale is difficult to make because there's pumpkin.
Exactly.
So we're having to get that out. And it's crazy in July dealing with pumpkin, in a beer.
I've given 4. We're going back to Untapped. I've given 4 5s in Untapped, and that pumpkin is one of them. It's absolutely one of my favorite beers.
I say thank you. I didn't have anything to do with it.
It's all right. It's here. It's made here.
But that beer, Blackstone's made for a long time. It's always been one of my favorites. I'm not real big on spiced and flavored beers, as I've commented before, but I feel like that spice is very subtle. You get a lot of them. You get hit so much with the nutmeg and the cinnamon, and that is much more subtle. And I think you're truly getting more of a pumpkin character out of it than just the spice itself.
Is it me, or is that served on draft a little warmer, or should it be?
It's generally speaking, ale should be served warmer than lagers. Most retail establishments don't have a setup to have separate temperatures for that, so it's always going to be seen the same. But in general, ales should be served a little warmer than lagers.
I think it was either here or maybe the old building. I had that and it was like, it was a little warmer. I was like, that's actually even better.
Yeah,
you think of it as
exactly
really, really cold.
Yeah, when the temperature does come up, and so many places market, we have the frosty mug. There's a national chain that their big thing. They advertise their beers at 29 degrees, and you get a frozen mug and stuff, and even lagers. I mean, you can't taste the beer. You've got to let the temperature come up in order to taste it. So I would never ever want a frozen mug anywhere I go.
It gets the ice crystals on top of the beer.
Exactly.
That's just water.
And, I know there's a certain market, people that do like that beer, but I think they like the beer because they're not really tasting the beer.
Right. It's very cold though.
Yeah. But to really get the effects of the beer and the characters, you definitely want to warm it up. And ales, you want to even have more of a warmer temperature than.
Definitely.
Call it true cellar temperature.
One last thing. I have a funny story. I homebrew a little bit. I'll do more because I do it in the garage now because the weather's getting nicer. But I tried to make a fest beer last year. I didn't really have any good equipment to do it with, so I converted my garage beer fridge I tried to reverse engineer it, and try to make it warmer than it should be to lager it. It didn't come out. It didn't come out. It was flat. I had to go back and open every bottle, and I put those little cubes, that looks like sugar cubes, to kind of and to get it to ferment a little more, I guess, and get some carbonation to it. And then even when it did that, it was horrible. So it was just
it's tough.
I dumped it. I dumped every bit of it.
I mean, from a home brewing, I haven't homebrewed in years, but I made a lot of home brews over the years, and I only attempted to do lager a few times, and every time I tried to make it in the homebrewing aspect, it really didn't come out.
You got to have certain equipment.
And like I said when we started, lagers are finicky, and it's very difficult to do a lager right.
Yeah, I was making it too cold, I think. Even though I'd raised the temperature as high as I could, and I have a PID controller I plugged in. I use for still, but it doesn't work that way.
Sure.
So it was just too cold.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that was my experience with a lager. It wasn't good.
Since it is St. Patrick's Day, I thought I'd throw out a little trivia for you guys. Just a little historical information about St. Patrick's. There really was a St. Patrick.
Right.
He had absolutely nothing to do with beer or green beer by all means. But how St. Patrick, how all that came about was his real name was Merwin Sukat. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but he was actually English. He was not even Irish. But he was from England, and at 16 years old, he got kidnapped and got enslaved in Ireland. So he was brought to Ireland and working basically on a big farm plantation. And this is in the 400s, so we're talking 1600 years ago. And was enslaved there. He was, I think 6 years, he was held in captivity, forced labor. And he eventually escaped. And he prayed every night. If he has the ability to escape, he would devote his life to God. And so ultimately, after 6 years, he escaped, found his way back to England, and from there, he entered the church and became a priest. After maybe like 15 years, I think, of studying, he ended up becoming a priest. And then he devoted his life to, mostly, they were pagans back then. So he devoted his life to spreading the word of Christianity in Ireland, to the area that kidnapped him. So he went back to Ireland and started spreading Christianity, and he used the clover as a way to talk about the Holy Trinity. The Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, the three leaves of the clover. That's why the shamrock is kind of what we know of as, tie that in with St. Patrick's Day. But his Christian name, when he adopted a Christian name after converting Christianity, became, he was Patrick. So then ultimately he was sainted, became St. Patrick, and that's the reason for the shamrock. And I can't tell you where the green beer came from.
Where does that tie in with the...
But dry stout, Ireland, we all think of Guinness and other dry stouts as the national beer, that we drink on St. Patty's Day, not green beer. But that was the prevalent beer that came about. And so that's what we celebrate St. Patrick's Day today with.
We're happy he existed.
Yeah.
Sorry you got kidnapped. But.
Yeah, exactly.
And there you have it, the history of St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
The things you learn on the Brewery Underground Podcast. Well, fantastic. Well, Scott Mertie from Nashville Brewing Company, we appreciate you so much today.
Oh, sure thing. It's been a pleasure.
Joining us on this podcast. And again, this was our very first podcast on location.
Well, we're glad to host it.
Yeah, definitely. And I look forward to, I know we both do, look forward to talking to you again soon because, we appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Let me say thanks. You came in early. We're the only ones in the brewery. You opened it up for us.
Yeah, we're going to drink some more beer and do a tour here in a second.
That's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Yes, thank you very much.
Looking forward to it. All right, everybody. We appreciate it. I'm Steve Sullivan for the Chancellor of Craft Beer, Scott Touron. This has been the Brewery Underground Podcast.
Cheers.